I hope you enjoyed part 1 and welcome to part 2 of my memoir, The Past Happenings. Please remember to like and subscribe so you'll be notified of my next video. I would really appreciate that. Now let's recap and discuss where we left off in part 1. Mother begged father to leave for Mexico until the Civil War was concluded. She had just lost her previous husband to the conflict and didn't want to lose Jerry, her second husband, in such a manner. So this is where we are. Jerry is in Mexico, and Mother, at 25 years of age, is raising 7 children on her own. William, John, Eunice, and Jake, her husband's children, and Chloe, Ben, and Frank, her own children. So let's get started with part 2 of Roseanne Gregg Harper's memoir, The Past Happenings. The Blizzard of Blizzards. It was very dry that fall, and the weather was warm. No weeds or grass grew to graze on, so the stock got very thin, especially the sheep. The old ewes, heavy with lamb, got very weak. The boys, when not pulling corn or digging potatoes, would drive the stock to fresh grazing wherever they could find it. Still, they couldn't do much, for the grass was dry and no weeds at all. Their home was situated on open prairie-like land, 3 miles off the Colorado River, near Onion Creek. The water from this creek ran into the river, and there was a cliff, Horseshoe Bend, with high walls that cut the hardest winds off. The boys often during storms drove their sheep there for shelter. It had been a mild winter, and Mother and Will were talking it over. Will said,
"If it stays this warm, we will have a fine crop of lambs. I wish it would rain. I know we would get through all right."
"I don't think so, William. I'm sure it's going to storm. We are bound to have cold weather yet, and a late spring."
And sure enough, it did. They saw a black cloud rising from the north, and as soon as they could, they rounded up the sheep and started them to the cliffs. But they traveled slowly. The wind came with a swoosh, with rain that began to freeze on them. The sheep began to bunch. Will popped his whip, yelled, and began to whip them along, but they just seemed to creep along. John pulled his coat off and whipped and cussed them. When one fell, they would help it up, then whip and cuss. There they huddled in bunches for warmth. The stronger would ride over the weaker ones. By this time, it was snowing, but the wind would sweep around the bend. The boys built a fire out of driftwood. Before they scarcely got the fire to going, the sheep began to crowd around. That gave Will an idea. He went a few feet to set a drift of wood on fire. But that created a bigger problem. The sheep in the back began pushing to get closer to the fire. John had been trying to keep the sheep back from the fire, but the stronger ones and those behind were pushing those in front, butting, and even riding those in front, pushing them into the fire. John slashed them in the face. By this time, the little fellow was crying. John said, "Will, they are going to burn, by damn. They are burning up, the fools." By this time, the little fellow was crying, Will, come help me." But Will had all he could do to keep them from burning themselves up in his fire. He called John to go get Mother to help. He turned away and climbed up the cliff. When he got to the top, the wind met him. He fell back, but caught a limb of scrub hackberry and crawled up and over, and ran, blinded by sleet that stung and hurt. He knew the general direction home, and tucked his head down, and floundered along, and bumped into his mother. She gave a grunt, and they both fell.
"Lord help me, why didn't you look where you were going?"
"I was coming to get you to help us. We built a fire to keep warm, and the fool sheep pushed each other in, and some were burning up."
Mother asked where Will was, and John said he was building some more fires.
"He sent me to get you to help build more fires and keep the sheep back."
"Do you think you can get home, John?"
"Yes, Mother, I can."
"Well, get warmed up, eat your supper, put on more clothes, get the children to bed, and bring William something to eat."
All this time the wind was whipping and shushing her around. The ground was white with snow and sleet. For a minute, the sleet would cut her face and blind her. Then the wind would slow up and the snow would come down. Then the wind would pick up with a swoop and a dash that would almost carry her off her feet. Her hands had no feeling, and her feet felt so heavy. But she floundered on until she got to the cliff. She almost blew off, but she turned around and crawled down. What a sight met her eyes. Will had a dozen or more fires going. The sheep were just packed tight, shoving, bleeding, and pushing. Some were down, the others just trampling them. Many were smothered. Will would step up on their backs, walk on them, and pull the ones down and over to another fire, if not too crowded. If too crowded, he would lay them in any sheltered place he could find. Mother began pulling too, but William told her not to do that, but to build more fires. So they built fires, and both would save as many as they could. They knew that they were losing many sheep. The sheep's backs were covered with snow, and their sides hanging with icicles. They were suffering greatly, bleeding and bunching. John came and took Will's place while he ate and rested. Then they all worked so hard, they actually sweated. They would stop for a few minutes, but would go to chilling. The wind kept swooshing all night and all the next day. Their drifts of wood were getting scarce, but the sheep were getting so hungry, weak, and dazed, they were not pushing as hard. The boys carried wood from another sandbar. When morning came, she went home, sick at heart, with cold, loss of sleep, and worry, for there were 8 people to feed and clothe, and she was depending on the sale of wool. But now, what was the use? They would suffer and go hungry, and another child was coming. Was there any wonder at her worrying? When she got home, the oldest girl, Eunice, had a fire going. The younger children dressed and was trying to prepare breakfast. Mother fed and milked the 2 cows and fed the team. They had shelter under the shed. Then she put on a pot of beans and filled a big Dutch oven with sweet potatoes and cooked bread for all day. Then she led a horse and carried meat, bread, uncooked potatoes, salt, and went back to help the boys. She couldn't go the trail down the cliff, so she went to a slant. The horse balked. She pulled on the reins, but he stood. She got by his side and whipped his knees with a quirt, and he slid down the slant. He snorted, and of course he pulled Mother, and she slid down too. She was not hurt, but skinned one arm and leg. She led the horse around the bend. The boys tied a lariat around logs and pulled them up to make fires. They made coffee, roasted potatoes, and it was still cold. The dead sheep were lying here and there, in branches all covered with snow. It was a cold, dismal scene. The icicles were hanging 10 and sometimes 15 feet long from the cliffs. Icicles on the scrub bushes snapped and ground in the wind. Across, on the east side of the river, in heavy timber, so heavily loaded with ice, the branches would break off. They sounded like guns popping. The river was frozen from the side to near the middle, and so thick near the bank on their side, they had to pound it with a pole of wood to get water to drink. Mother went back home to tend the children and do the chores. She found her chickens and 1 calf frozen. But the girls had kept a fire and melted snow to drink and to cook with. Mother went back to help the boys and carry feed for the horse. They got through the next day. Just before the night, the wind blew hard, but it stopped snowing and cleared off. John was so weary that he could hardly stay awake, so Mother sent him home to sleep. Mother kept the fires going, and Will sat among the sheep by the fire, and the sheep would crowd him over when he went to sleep. He would get up and push them off and go back to sleep again. Poor boy was so tired and dead for sleep. Mother would throw sticks on the fires and keep them going. While working, she would think, "What will we all do? All our sheep but about 600 out of 2,000 head, all their wool lost." Then she thought, "Why can't we shear the dead ones if the cold keeps up a few days? We can get help to shear them. 4 men ought to be able to shear them in 5 days if we can get them." Now she knew that if it stayed cold, they might do it, but if it got warm, the dead sheep would spoil. There was a chance. If she could get Will awake so he could go get help, the wool might be saved. Poor boy, she disliked to disturb him, but that was all they had for the following year. She shook him awake and told him. He said he didn't know if he could ride or not. He ate and drank a strong cup of coffee and went up the river to the crossing and to Austin. He got 4 men to promise to be there at sunup the next morning. He went back to the sheep and piled up and slept. The next morning, the sun broke out, but the wind blew cold. The ice and snow began to melt. John and Mother took the horse to the house and hitched up the team to the wagon and loaded lumber and tools down to the slant. There, they shoved them down. They built a platform on the sandbar for the men to shear on. The men came and got ready by 10 o'clock to shear, and then it was steady work for 3 days. The wind kept cold and strong, and on the evening of the 3rd day, the wind turned to the east, and they knew that by the next day the dead sheep couldn't be shorn. As they had 9 sacks of wool saved, they felt very thankful indeed, and the men they had hired felt good too, as they were making wonderful wages, $2 a day, and the usual pay was $1 a day. Meanwhile, John had driven or drifted the live sheep here or there, anywhere so they could find any kind of nourishment. Poor things. When the sun came out and snow melted on their backs, a lot of them gave up the ghost. They had enough to start again, and they were fortunate, as most of their neighbors lost all they had. Dead cattle and other stock were lying everywhere they went. At the same time, 10 freighters broke a wagon wheel, and they stopped on the open prairie to mend it. The blizzard caught them with no wood at all. They burned the ox yokes to keep from freezing, and their oxen drifted away and froze. There were other bad blizzards in 1864, 1886, and 1899 that did thousands of dollars of damage to stockmen in the South. Father comes home. May 19th, 1864, a baby girl was born. Mother named her Cynthia. 3.5 years passed with no word from Father. One night, after supper, Mother was spinning. The girls were washing dishes in the kitchen, the boys sitting in the room studying, and the babies playing on a pallet on the floor. Mama looked up and saw Father standing in the door. She ran to him, went to crying, and said, "I thought you were dead." After he talked to the children and saw his new child and ate supper, they sat up most of the night talking. Mama told Father about the blizzard and what happened while he was gone. Then Father told them about how he caught up with Lewis Nelson and traveled with him to Brownsville and across the Rio Grande to Tampico. He and several families worked and hunted in Mexico until they heard the war was over in the spring of 1865. They heard of work in New Orleans, so they got on a sailing vessel and were caught in a hurricane 3 days out. It blew them way off course. Then there was no wind for days, and they ran out of vegetables. Fish, hardtack, and water were all they had to eat most of the time. A great many took scurvy. 2 men died, and most had given up and thought they would starve. Finally, they got a wind and got back on course and made it to New Orleans 3 weeks from the time they started. A man told Father there was a woman that sold a bottle of medicine and would tell their fortunes for $1. Father asked him if he advised him to go to her, and he said he knew of cases of scurvy that got well. Father said he did not believe in fortune-telling, but if the medicine cured him, it would be worth $1. They went to see her, and she asked what he wanted. He told her he was told that she sold medicine that would cure the scurvy, and he wanted a bottle. She told him that she would tell his fortune, but saw that he did not have faith in her. She asked him if he would like to hear from his family in Texas. He told her yes, he would. She said they had trouble with sheep in a blizzard and lost a lot, but were all well. They haven't heard from you, but there is a surprise. You have a little girl born 7 months after you left. He paid the $1 and left. He told Lewis about it and said some people might be gifted, but he doubted it. Nelson said, "I will get a bottle and ask about my family and catch her." He went to her and asked about his family in Texas. She told him that he knew more about his family than she did as they were with him, but there was something that would surprise him. Because he hadn't paid the taxes on his land, the government in Texas had given his land to another man. He had paid the taxes and was working it. She advised him to return to Texas and preempt more land. He paid his dollar and returned to camp, ashamed that he had tried to fool her. Father worked as a stonemason for 2 years in New Orleans after regaining his health. Then he started walking home. As there was no mail going through to Austin at this time, he had no way of contacting his family. He carried a blanket and a few clothes. He got several chimneys and cisterns to build on the way. Once in a while he got a ride, but walked most of the way to Houston. There he got a ride with a freighter to Austin, then walked the 6 miles home. The next day, Father walked all over his land. It looked bad. The grass was short. He would have to hunt a new range for the sheep or sell the home. He talked it over with Mother. She said if we had a good range and shelter from the cold, we could save our sheep as wool will be high and bring a good price. Most of our neighbors have moved because they lost everything in the blizzard. He thought he would look around and see what he could find. He went to Austin and found a man who had some land on Honey Creek. That was about 40 miles from Austin. The man said he would sell cheap because there was no school there. There was plenty of timber, well sheltered, and had a good spring on it. He talked to the boys, and they thought they could study at home. They got a Mexican herder named Pedro to herd the sheep. The boys helped build a rock house and put up a log kitchen to cook and eat in, as well as a small shed for the boys to sleep in. They had been there a little over a year when I was born, March 2nd, 1868. I never nursed from my mother. She had no doctor and was in bed for 3 months. Eunice and Chloe took care of me and did the housework. They raised me on gruel and cow's milk. Chloe told me she would take me out under the Spanish oak trees with their pretty red and green colors. She would throw leaves and I would reach and laugh till I got sleepy. Then she would sit beside me and knit. Finally, Father found a doctor who did something for Mother that helped her. In time, she was walking and able to spin wool to make coverlets for the beds. About this time, Eunice married George Scott. Mama did not like this place here at Honey Creek. She said she wondered why Father had picked this place for a home with no school for the children. Ben, Frank, Eunice, Cynthia, and Jake all were old enough to go. He told her one day he was looking for a homestead where they could live for the rest of their lives. He had heard of a place he thought would do in Williamson County. It had a big spring, a 5-acre field, and a school just 3 miles away. The place was on the line between Travis and Williamson counties, at the headwaters of Brushy Creek, 35 miles from Austin, and 5 miles from Baghdad, now called Florence. Father and the boys went to look at it. The boys were carried away with the place. They said there were wild plum and peach trees, 25 feet high, and had fine soil for growing things. So Father sold the sheep with the place and got a good price. He took 10 brood mares and a stallion called Black Hawk in the trade. Black Hawk was as gentle as a cat. He was a grand horse. The boys would comb and braid his mane and tail. They first made the house livable. He built chicken houses and sheds for the work horses. There were 10 acres for a small pasture between the house and orchard. That orchard was the queerest place. The rock covered about 5 acres, all flat, with cracks 1 yard wide of solid white stone running east and west. Father would commence at the end of the strips, mark a line across it, then take a sledgehammer and an old axe and put in on the mark and hit the axe with the sledgehammer. The rock would burst straight across and about 6 inches thick. They built the house of cedar logs and floored it with the smooth white stones, mortared the cracks that joined together. That was the coolest place to sleep on a buffalo hide. Father would lie down on it and sleep after dinner, and Cynthia would too. He broke up the rocks and built a fence all around those 5 acres to make an orchard. I can remember carrying small rocks in my little white apron to fill up the chinks, and when I was lazy he would call, "Roseanne, bring some more chinks." I would run, for I liked to be with him. One fall day, he was gone nearly all day and brought back a peck of peach seeds to plant. The next day, he called me to help him. He dug a bed 4 inches deep and took each seed and laid it on its side, crumbled dirt over it until the bed was full, and then pressed the dirt down all over with his foot. I asked him when they could come up and grow. He said not to bother them, and if it rained, you could come see if they are up when the Spanish oak trees start to leaf out. He showed me a Spanish oak and said, on your birthday, there will be red sprouts coming up around the tree, and on my birthday, the leaves will be out growing. Well, I watched and it was true. 2 or 3 little forked plants were showing in the seedbed. I ran to tell him. He had plowed the orchard that winter. He took a big pan and trowel, scooped them out, and planted them where he wanted a tree. How fast they grew. He got apples, pears, plums, and quince, too. When Father built the stone fence, he brought it east of the house about 40 yards and built stone steps, 4 on each side, then laid a flat rock on top. One could sit on it, or stand and see the salt licks, the stock pens, and away up the road. The old-timers spread salt on flat ledges of rocks for the stock. We had to carry our water from the spring. We went over the steps, down a slant to a ledge of rock. A little farther on there were 4 ledges to go down, and then was the spring, clear and cold. The water was spouting up a foot or more through a crack, then it ran on down to a pool. Above the spring there were rock bluffs in a horseshoe shape. On the north side, the bluffs stopped at the ledges. On the east side, it went on down and made 2 caves where we children played on Sundays and rainy days. The boys had a bow and arrows to shoot birds. We would clean them and broil them on short sticks. We roasted potatoes, too. We did have fun. There were large trees down on each side of the bluffs, pecans, walnuts, oaks, persimmons, underbrush of catclaw, and lots of wild grapes, ferns, and sassafras bushes. It was a lovely place, but I was afraid to go get water by myself. Sometimes I would stand on the top ledge and look all around. I would think if there is a panther in the brush, the birds would not sing. Then Mother would call, and I would run to the spring and then back. I had a small tin bucket to get water in. In warm weather, that water was so cold and tasted so good. Sam Bass loses the Rangers. During this time, Brother William and Molly Scott got married. John joined the Rangers September 8, 1870. The Rangers disbanded in May 1871 due to Reconstruction-era political restructuring following the American Civil War. There was a great excitement about Sam Bass. Some said he was hiding out in Brushy Bottom. Texas Rangers were sent to hunt him out. They found him, but he ran, and they lost him. The Rangers camped that night near our home. Brother John stayed the night with us. He gave me a broken coffee mill. It was square with the grinder inside. One put it between the knees to grind with it. Frank mended it, and it worked fine. Our old one was nailed on the wall. I always had to get up on a chair to reach it. Well, I was delighted, and gave him a kiss. He said that paid for it. We had the mill for years. He also gave me a small china dish to mix paints in, and I have it yet. He also gave Mother 2 white scalps he had taken off a dead Indian. They were horrible-looking things. It made me sick to look at them. Well, the Rangers went down to where there was a mill and store about 10 miles above the head springs on Brushy. They camped there and hunted Brushy out until they heard Sam Bass was killed trying to rob a bank in a town below Austin. From there, they were sent to Pilot Knob in Travis County, west of Austin, where some Indians had stopped after they had made a raid and killed some people. The Rangers had a hard fight, but got them. That was the last raid by the Indians we ever heard of. Along about that time, 1871, an old lady came to stay with us. She taught me some new songs. Happy Day, When Jesus Washed My Sins Away, and Brother, Don't You Want to Go With Me. She knew a lot of songs and sang when at work. One morning when I awoke, I heard a baby crying and I went to see. Mama was in bed with a little baby. I asked whose baby it was. She said, "It's mine, and he's your little brother." Well, I wasn't the baby anymore, but he was so sweet I loved him. He had blue eyes, white hair, and a red face. His name was Jesse. The children and Chloe were going to school at the blockhouse settlement 3 miles from home. The blockhouse was a little place, or fort strongly built, where women and children ran for safety when the Indians made a raid to steal horses. It hadn't been long since they had killed 2 men and drove their horses off. Land of Plenty. Several farmers raised wheat near the blockhouse, and Father took me with him to see the thresher. He showed me where the bundles went in and where the grain came out and was poured into sacks. I asked him how they made the flour. He said he would show me everything, and he bought a sack of flour. There was a store close by, and he bought me a pink dress. Oh, how I loved Father. He was stern with us, but I never remember him whipping us. There was a good crop of fruit, and Mother was drying peaches and wild Mustang grapes on the front porch roof. She would cut the peaches in two and discard the seed. Cynthia and Frank would climb onto the roof and turn them twice a day. I helped Mother pull out the thick hulls to dry. Mama and Chloe preserved plums and other fruit in cut-off bottles. The way they cut the bottles off was to wet a cord of spun thread and wrap it around the shoulder of the bottle. The thread was first dipped in turpentine and then set on fire. When the thread had burned and the ash was beginning to fall off, they would quickly push the bottle down into a bucket of cold water. The top would snap off, smooth all the way around. When they filled the bottles with preserved fruit, they pasted cloth or paper over the tops with melted beeswax. The dried peaches and other dried fruit were put into round gourds. Father broke the gourds from the vines with the stems still on. He measured 1 inch down from the shoulder, drew a line all the way around the gourd, and sawed it off. That made a lid for it. They took out the seeds and scraped the inside clean and white. They soaked the gourds in lye soap and rinsed them well to take away the bitter taste. We often stored lye soap in the gourds. Do you children know what it was to make an ash hopper? Father set out 4 posts about 4 feet apart. He made a trough from hollow logs and placed one end higher than the other. We filled it with oak ashes. Then we poured water over the ashes until it soaked through to the lower end of the trough and dripped into an iron kettle. That was lye. When Mother had collected 3 gallons, she put it into a large kettle with 3 pounds of pork skins or trimmings from bacon. She cooked it over a small fire until it was like molasses candy. Then she stored it in the gourds. That was lye soap. It was so strong that it made our hands sore. After a long time, we were able to get lye in balls covered with resin from pine. I was nearly grown before I saw commercial soap or hand soap, although they had it in the big cities. They also dried pumpkins. When the pumpkins were ripe, we washed and dried them. Then we cut them into round pieces about 1 inch thick and hung them on poles in the smokehouse alongside the cured meat to dry. How good they were in the winter, cooked with pork shoulder. In the fall, the sweet potatoes were dug. The boys had dug a pit to keep them from freezing. They lined it with straw, then piled the potatoes on and covered them with straw. Then boards and dirt were placed on top, with a door remaining to get the potatoes out. I have never tasted such good sweet potatoes when cooked in an iron Dutch oven or roasted in the ashes. There was always so much to do. All the clothes were handmade. There were so many socks and gloves to knit, besides spinning, cording, and quilting. It was one round of work of one thing or another, and always a new baby to tend to. Cynthia was 4 years older than me, and was helping Mother most of the time, so I had no one to play with. I was so glad about the new baby. They would let me sit in a chair and hold him soon. Later he and I would lie on the buffalo rug and play, and it wasn't long before he could crawl. Then I had to watch that he kept off the rock floor, for it was always cold. When he was asleep, I could get water or see about the seabed. West of the house, there was the biggest walnut tree I ever saw. The limbs were as large as common trees. Father took 2 log chains and made us a swing with a flat board to sit on. That tree shaded the whole backyard. Ben, Jake, and Frank slept out there on hot summer nights. Eunice married George Scott, so there were only 3 boys left to work at farming time. Chloe and Cynthia were the big girls that could help in the fields. When Jesse was 3 years old, he would hide from me. It was a game we played. One day, Mother had gone to help a sick woman. Father was working away from home. The girls were helping in the field. Frank was home, and he and another boy were cleaning soot out of the stovepipe and the fireplace chimney. They had set the stove out in the yard. Jesse and I had been playing hide and seek. That time I hunted for him, but couldn't find him. I would call, but he wouldn't answer. The boys came down from the room and started to clean the stove. Several joints of pipe were on the stove and full of soot. They hit the pipes with a stick to make the soot turn loose. They opened the door to the stove, and Jesse was in there. He was laughing and crawled out. He said, "No find me." His white hair was black, his face was black, and his blue eyes shining. He danced around laughing. The boys were laughing too. Well, I rubbed off as much as I could and put him in the tub of water and scrubbed with lye soap and got him as clean as I could. I put clean clothes on him, gave him some milk to drink, and covered him up. He said, "Sleep, Jesse, sleep." He went right to sleep. Then I had to wash his clothes and carried them to the spring and scrubbed and rinsed them, but they didn't look clean. Then I hung them on an apple tree to dry. Jesse got sick. Jesse had never been sick. I was nearly 7 years old, and he was almost as heavy as I was. The next day, I saw Mama walking the floor. I asked Mama what was the matter. She said that poor little Jesse was very sick, that he could move his eyes, but not his body, and Father had gone for the doctor. He couldn't talk either. She said the doctor would help him, and then she started crying. But when the doctor came and examined him, he said he had infantile paralysis and that he was dying. He said there was nothing more he could do for him than they were already doing, and went away. Mama started crying. I went outside by myself. I was scared. I had never seen a dead person or been to a funeral. Mama had told me to do my work. I fed the chickens and looked for eggs, all the time thinking of my little brother. I had seen chickens and pigs die. The boys would throw them over the high bluff onto the rocks far below. Then the buzzards came and ate them. Suddenly, I wondered if they would do little Jesse that way. I couldn't stand it. I started screaming and running away. Brother Frank ran after me and caught and shook me, saying, "Stop! What's the matter?" "Will they throw Jesse down the bank if he dies?" I asked. He put his arms around me tight and told me that Jesse's soul would go to Jesus, where the angels would take care of him. All people have to die sometime, and if they were good, they would go to heaven. He said, "We don't throw people down the bank when they die. Someone builds a coffin out of wood, like a little trundle bed, just his size, and they line it with soft cloth. They put his body in it with pretty flowers, but Jesus takes his soul up to heaven where beautiful angels stay." I asked him what a soul was. He said baby souls were their minds and feelings. Well, I felt better then. Frank said, "Let's go milk the cows." I went with him and we talked about the new calves. That night, Jesse died. Uncle Charles Hornsberg brought a coffin, and they put Jesse in it with beautiful flowers. Father's preacher talked a while, and some of them sang songs. Then the preacher took me up to look at Jesse. "Brother is asleep," I said. "Yes, asleep with Jesus," he said. I went back to Father, and he stood with his hand on my head. I wondered why they all were crying if what Frank said was true. I cried a little because they did. But why should we? They buried him in Baghdad Cemetery. I missed him so much. I was standing by the buffalo rug, so lonely. Mother came to me and hugged me tight. "My baby is gone," she said. "You will have to be my baby now." That helped some, but how I did miss him. When I went in the yard, his tracks were still there, where he had stepped in the mud. His corn cob all branded JG by me. His little bow and arrows and his yoke of cob oxen were hanging on the apple tree. The clothes I had hung on the tree 2 days ago were still there. I didn't cry, for he wouldn't need them up there with angels. In another 4 months, I had another baby brother. He was just the opposite of Jesse. They named him James, and we called him Jimmy, Soon he was crawling around, and it became my job to watch him. And so, this brings part 2 of my memoirs to a close. I hope you have enjoyed sharing my journey so far. Please remember to like this video and subscribe so you will be notified when part 3 is released. I still have many more stories to tell. Stories about panthers, cowards, a huge snake that nearly frightened me to death, father seeing his mother again, and even a rabid dog and a rabid man. So bye for now.